Hey,
Steven,
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay.
Are you
Oh,
still watching Game of Thrones? I remember you were a couple years ago.
Game of Thrones. Yeah, I still like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has been I think it's not coming back until next year. So I've been back. I, I'm on what is it? Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah, that's another big one.
Yeah, and Walking Dead, and now Walking Dead is about to have its mid-season closer. It's pretty good season this year. I like it.
Awesome. Thank you for agreeing to have another interview with me.
Yeah, not a problem. How have you been?
Pretty good. I'm at Florida State now, so no more high school history fair.
Okay, how's that working out?
It's pretty good. I'm actually doing like a research project, and that's why I wanted to interview you.
Okay, sure.
I took the same subject that I used on the history fair, the explicit content label and like the PMRC and everything, but I'm kind of approaching it from a different aspect for this paper.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can just start asking you questions whenever you're ready.
Sure.
Okay. So I know back when we talked a few years ago, you were saying how like your biggest problem with the PMRC was actually how you didn't really agree with what they were saying their motives were.
Right.
I remember correctly. Could you like expand upon that for me?
Oh man, so I don't exactly remember the exact thing I said. So I think the along the line it's sort of like you're talking about like the parental warning labels on records and media, right?
Yes, sir.
So the idea is to protect people of a certain age, protect people from certain content when I think the problem is one of context on a level and I'm trying to remember these. Sorry, like going.
I know a lot of people thought that there was like political motives because Tipper Gore and like
yeah, because the whole problem was one of whether it was political content, sexual content, or adult content, and part of the issue was determining at what age. I was wondering if it was a bit a little cynical on one side. So parental warning levels in lieu of having actual discussion with people. Instead of having actual discussion about the ideas and the issues, people would rather have a warning label. You know what I mean? In lieu of having like actual frank discussion with their children about sexual content, political content, content that's considered to be obscene. You know, and the whole part of the thing is, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit fuzzy this time this go around. And I suppose, it's easier to have to just not have a discussion at all. It's easier to put a label on things as opposed to answering children's questions.
Right.
Because everybody has, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and, on the one hand, I think there's one hand there's this concern about, I remember, it was like sexual content was one thing, where violent content was like on a different, like kids see all kind of violence, and there's no real talk about where the violence is coming from, or violence against women, violence against children, violence against minorities.
Do you think that, like, your opinion on, like, almost the validity of the explicit content label and, like, the parental advisory has changed since you've become a parent, like, 12 years ago?
Well, I kind of think, when I think about my daughter, Dare, I like to think that we can talk about anything, but her life is a very different life than my life.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of, my daughter was born in 2003,
Mm-hmm.
and she's never known a world without Facebook.
Right.
I mean, and I think the most jarring reality for the adult world, people say, who came of age, and, it's one thing to have seen the technology come in.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing for that to be your reality from the time you're born, the quickness of sort of sexual codes, not just sexual, I don't want to get hung up on sex, but of all kinds of information. It's a different reality, and part of the thing is that people are under a lot more pressure to conform, and they're under a lot more pressure to go along with certain things than in previous generations.
So do you think that, like, now it's almost like it would almost kind of make sense for us to be censoring our content, whereas back when, like, the PMRC was bringing this stuff up, it was kind of unnecessary? Because I feel like music as a whole, I'm sure you have a, like, more in-depth opinion on this because you're actually a musician. I'm just an 18-year-old, like, with a computer. I don't know. And, like, I feel like it went a lot from, like, talking about, like, in Cult of Personality, you talked about, like, Joseph Stalin and, like, monumental people, whereas now, like, in our songs, it's people who are mentioned are, like, the Kardashians or Beyonce, you know?
It's, I think part of the thing is that the nature of having discussion about the topics has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And on the one hand, we kind of have to get over the shock of the new.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Warfare, to talk about violence for a second, or, the state claims a monopoly on violence for the good of its citizens, and the state is supposed to act, on the citizens' behalf for their safety and protection, all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have like a sanitized, for years, we've had, people that actually had experience of battlefields.
Mm-hmm.
It's a harrowing thing. It's literally harrowing.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been protected, and it's been sanitized. Like, the Vietnam War was pretty raw in terms of the media. People actually saw what happened a lot more than they saw what happened in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Where they just had like radio reports of it. They didn't get really raw, until much later on. People said, no, like, when the first launches on D-Day, the first boats, everyone knows those boats were killed. I mean, like, 90% of those boats that went in, when they opened the launch doors, people got shot and were killed immediately. And it was a bloody, horrible mess. For them to get on Iowa Beach was a bloody, horrible mess. And to take on the reality of these things is very different. And there's a kind of I don't even know if it's necessary hypocrisy, but there's a kind of hypocrisy. Like, the largest manufacturer of condoms was the U.S. Army.
Mm-hmm.
and that was something that was kind of not, that was not something people talked about because young men who were about to die, right? They're in their sexual prime. Not to be so frank about that, but okay. But the reality of it is like things like you couldn't have soldiers sidelined by venereal disease. Mm-hmm. So one of the solutions for that was that instead of kind of like
instead of telling
I'm sure they would have preferred to have the abstinence discussion with these young men. But it became a matter of practicality. Like, that's not going to happen. These guys are going to. So what's the next best thing? We have to, so the first large-scale production of condoms or rubbers, if you will, is the U.S. Army. And that was a fact that was kind of kept from the public didn't really get that. Mm-hmm. And nobody had the actual frank discussion about this is what warfare is. And then when the Vietnam War came, and then when we heard about what soldiers were doing, and some of that was not pretty. Well, there were things that went on during World War II that were ugly, horrible things. They like one of the things that there was a situation where soldiers in the Pacific Theater were taking actual trophies. They were taking like the ears of Japanese soldiers and things as trophies. And at a certain point, there were appeals made to please stop taking the ears and of Japanese soldiers. And it's what I mean. And that was like they would take the ear of a soldier and send it home as a souvenir. So this is the greatest generation. So you understand? So there's a disconnect. There's and closing the gap of the disconnect. That's the thing. Now, all the ideas there's a clamp down, and the only reason why you're getting some frank discussion is because of the technology. Soldiers are taking actual
if that was happening right now, we would all hear about it.
Yeah. So there are difficult discussions to be had. Like one of the most curious things that's happened, is that there was recently a story of a sexting ring, right? Where there were all these kids. I believe it was. I'm probably misspeaking. I think it might have been in Texas, or a small town, where teenage kids were sending nude pictures of each other, and it started to become this like a craze, and kids were kind of pressured into doing it, and so the situation was really difficult, and part of the reason why is that. And no one anticipated this, but this whole notion of child pornography, right? Like if you send pictures of underage, nude pictures of an underage person, the laws in the books like kind of demand that the authorities act like it's child porn. But this is not an adult exploiting the child; it's the children themselves doing it. So you're both the supposed victim, like if you send a picture of yourself, you could be arrested, even though you did it yourself. But because you send a picture of yourself, that's considered to be. And so, and people, and so the lawmakers, everyone's upset. The lawmakers are scratching their heads, and the judges are like, "What are we doing?"
Right, because the laws haven't caught up to like the new methods of.
The laws haven't caught up, like to move it away from even hot and stuff like that. This is maybe not directly on the topic. Like you recently here in New York, these hoverboards, these two-wheeled, recently these hoverboards were considered were declared illegal in New York. And I was going, God damn it. But there's this thing of, okay, so there's this trend, and I don't know if there have been, fatal accidents or whatever, but immediately, now skateboarding is still legal, right? And bicycling is still legal. Now, why the hoverboard is a special case? Because the hoverboards, as far as I can tell, and I've seen a few people on them, they don't go faster than someone skateboarding. But it's like this crazy thing of it's a motor vehicle, and it's like I'm gonna. And we won't even get into the whole thing with drugs. Like, the thing now, it's used. Everyone's upset. And it's kind of a trip because, on the one hand, it's a fun activity. I mean, we've had radio-controlled helicopters for years. But now you call it a drone, and suddenly there's a freak out. But I think the toy helicopters have had the ability to have cameras on them, especially if you have the larger, the RC copters with engines. That's been around for a long time. But because suddenly drone, and then it's suddenly, popular, it's, everyone says, ban it, license it, you gotta be a pilot.
So it's really like a time thing, like in newness.
Yeah, it is a shock of the new, and we don't understand it, and my kids are doing it, but nobody can have the, I think there's a desperate fear of loss of control of the narrative or something, and the idea that kids are making their own narratives and their own stories, and the context of what that is, like between bullying, sexual activity, political ideas, and don't let terrorism come into it, and everyone's hair goes on fire immediately. And part of the thing that what's happening now is, one of the things that I find is, instead of I think it's just important to know who your kid is. I think it's important to know who your kid is and be able to, and really have an environment that's less of a punitive environment and more of a, okay, so, what do, how do I handle this? How do we have a discussion about things that are frankly difficult,
So, like,
it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I'm not going to say. I would say the only thing to do is the whole thing with same-sex relationships and things like that. Like, this whole thing, and there's been a discussion about whether, the idea of the gay lifestyle. Lifestyle is such a loaded kind of word, because that's just kind of as opposed to reality, right? Like lifestyle is like, I just feel like exploring the the gay thing. I think it's crazy. I think that having a discussion about what those feelings are, what does that mean, and families get they get turned upside down behind it.
So, like, almost in a way, do you think that, like, the PMRC, they were trying to, like, almost contribute to that avoidance of, like, parents talking with their kids?
I think so. I very much so. I think that we have to get the genie back in the bottle. It's moving too fast. It's out of my hands. The whole uproar is also partially. This is kind of funny because that's very much a boomer reaction to things. But if you look at the 60s and 70s, it was hairball. The quote-unquote sexual revolution, that started in the 60s. And it wasn't going to go backwards. The whole idea of openness and frankness. I mean, back then, the problem was books. It was books like Tropic of Cancer, and things like that. People were, upset about content that was honest about sexual matters and things. But I think it's a little hypocritical for those people that came of age in the 60s, to turn around to their kids in the 80s, 90s, and beyond. I don't think it's ever been easy to talk about sexuality and reproduction and pleasure and all those sorts of things. It's very difficult, and actually, maybe it's not that hard. I mean, it depends on your take on what's the context. When the context, if it's from a religious context, that also gets people really upset. And, but there's all kinds of stuff if you're talking about it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, there's crazy stuff in the Bible that no preacher talks about.
Mm-hmm. That's so true.
And that's part of the. If anything, the Bible should have a parental advisory on it because there's crazy stuff in it. Everyone likes to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, this blah blah blah, and they take the stories out of context. And that's sort of like the story of Lot, you know what I mean, and turn into a pillar of salt. But I've never heard any preacher have an honest discussion about the instances of incest in the Bible. Mm-hmm. It's off the table. And whenever someone does have a discussion of it, it's a kind of crazy mumbling. That's because. And they go into a whole thing about, there were no other men around. I'm like, what? Are you kidding
me?
Right. But that's the thing, it's like these things are put out there, and because people are embarrassed, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to get into it. They just slap a label on it and let's put the genie back in the bottle. Let's not talk about it. And I think
so kind of like instead of parents listening to the music and they're like, okay, Jimmy, this is why I don't want you to listen to this song. They're like, I don't want you listening to this because of that label, It kind of like just ruined that whole narrative that could have happened.
It's like having like rap music and the N-word is tossed around all over the place. And part of the thing is the context for it is so fraught. Because it's like the issues are like, well, on the one hand you have a culture, a subculture that's developed, and that subculture is in the context of race relations. And the N-word is a kind of code amongst a certain group of people who are still grappling with the meaning of what that word is and how it's, but the commodification of that in popular music. And it's a discussion that quite frankly, black people are not really having an honest discussion about that either. And the whole idea that you can promote music to the majority of the population and sell that music, but not have a discussion about what does it mean to tell your white fans, you hear me saying these lyrics, but you can't repeat the very lyrics
that I'm selling to you.
That you're selling to you. And honestly get why there's a confusion and a real sense of a double standard. But that has to be put in context. But it would get into discussing psychological, sociological, and political implications.
And just a really complicated discussion that nobody wants to sit down and have.
Right. It's like it's too easy to me to say, well, it's a black thing and you don't understand. I think it's too easy. And I've heard that argument a lot. And I turn around and go, hell man, it's a black thing and I don't understand. I don't get it. But I come from a generation of, don't think that James Brown off stage didn't use all the language. He don't believe that James Brown didn't say it, but he would never dream of putting that on a commercial record.
Mm-hmm.
Never dream of it. And that's like, I don't know the solution. I mean, I don't even know what the solution is, but I do think that having an honest discussion about what that means historically is one of the most difficult things, because we haven't really had an honest discussion about slavery and what went on with that. We only started even like the Roots was the TV show Roots, not the band The Roots, but the TV show Roots. That was in the 80s. I mean, 12 Years a Slave was pretty recent, and we're still grappling with it. We're still grappling with it, and we're going to be grappling with it for a while. But that's another part of the equation in popular music and in terms of media.
I always thought it was kind of strange, like, while I'm doing all of this research, whether it was 3 years ago or now, I always did wonder, like, it's kind of ironic how back then, even if it was, in the 80s, people weren't using, like, the N-word or any derogative term as carelessly as people use it now. But the parental advisory label is implemented now, and it wasn't implemented, back then whenever those words were tossed around as frequently. It's always wondered, like, it was kind of like a forbidden fruit or label on
forbidden knowledge. Forbidden fruit, forbidden knowledge. That's the that really is. There was a whole culture, like there was a whole culture, like say in the 50s, and after World War, after World War II, there was a whole culture of stag parties. This whole thing where guys would go, and it was very much a male-dominated thing, and men would get together to drink, cuss, play cards, and show these films. Pornographic films. And that was like an acknowledged thing. So people would talk about the 50s like it was this squeaky clean, Playboy magazine and stag parties and things like that. That was flourished back then. And it was the whole idea of I think that the double standards were really a big problem. That women were considered, a woman has to be a virgin when she marries. A woman that quote unquote puts out is a slut, and it's a kind of nutty, the kind of pejorative nature of what sexuality has been.
Actually, I just saw a tweet today on the Twitter account College Fashion, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really popular in my generation. All college students know about this Twitter account, and people will submit crazy stories about they went to this party and did this, and a guy can submit something and say last night I hooked up with twins and I'm such a bro now, and then people will applaud them almost. And then I just saw one on there today that it actually made me so mad that I quote tweeted it, and it said something here, I'll just read it to you. It says, "It's pathetic that a majority of women won't be able to say that their husband took their virginity. Is it really worth it?" And I was like, What do you mean college fashion? Because just like 3 tweets ago, you were applauding some guy for having a threesome with people who were related to each other, but it's not okay for like a woman, like an 18, 19, 20-year-old woman to have like sex with somebody who they're not planning on marrying.
Yeah, but that hypocrisy, that double standard, it's related. Strangely enough, it's related to the idea of women not being paid the same as a man for the same amount of work. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. It's 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I mean to say, like, I was thinking about the whole bro culture and the fact that there's this sort of party drinking, rape, blah blah blah. It's the fraternity situation, the sorority situation, and all through it, there's just kind of privilege, double standards. All of that stuff is ongoing. And there's going to be fights about it, and there's going to be bullshit, constantly. And this is, from my perspective, it's very disheartening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's disheartening because I'm I'm like in my 50s, right? So I'm the age of parents and grandparents in this mix. And to see the same kind of nonsense, and to also say to myself, I grew up with the people that are trying to quote unquote lay down the law and blah blah. And I was like, they're full of shit. They're full of shit. I mean, like,
right.
When I was your age, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I find just really hard to take in a lot of where the quote unquote adult world is coming from. But you have to understand that people are very frightened, and they're very frightened of they're frightened of the same things that have been people were frightened of back in the days. And it's just that it's all happening much faster.
I know, like, one of the biggest arguments by the PMRC, they were like rock music in particular, it's like ruining family values because like it's talking about like satanic rituals, supposed satanic rituals, and like partying and drinking and like promiscuity and all this stuff. But then like Tipper Gore and her husband got divorced, and like the president of the United States had an affair, but Dee Snider, who was one of like the biggest people who were against everything that the PMRC stood for and actually like testified at the Senate committee hearings, he's still happily married like 30 years later to the same woman that he was married to during those trials. And like, I don't know, like hypocrisy is such of a...
Hypocrisy is a national, I say that hypocrisy is actually a natural resource in the country. Like we should have an hypocrisy index, on Wall Street. We could probably make a lot of money with that. I mean, it's one of those things. The do as I say, not as I do paradigm. Like the divorce rates in supposed red states are super high. People talking about we need to defend marriage. Yeah, I mean. The same woman that didn't want to grant same-sex couples marriage licenses. I mean, she was divorced 3 times. I mean, who's kidding who?
Yeah, who are you to say like you're an expert in marriage apparently?
And that's the thing. I think that people having rights and it's controversial because a lot of things that were we didn't really talk about it. There was silence around certain things. certainly around sexual preference, is a huge amount of silence. This is not new. This is not new stuff. And now that silence is coming to an end, there's a kind of a panic. There's a kind of panic. Because one of the things that's great about the same-sex coupling is that it effectively renders the closet obsolete. Because people can get married. And why is there, that's the other part of it. If people can get married, then why is the closet necessary?
I know, I'm originally from Connecticut. Like, I was born up north, and, like, I have family in New York, and, like, my uncle lives in Brooklyn. Like, we're a very northern family that just happens to live in, like, in the South, and I grew up in a county that, like, you were not gay. Like, that was not an option. I grew up, like, it was really country, like, lots of trucks and camo and all that stuff.
Right.
And it's funny because now we're all in college, like my generation, and so many people are just now starting to come out of the closet because they're finally away from their families, and because there's finally, like, changes happening, like, with gay marriage being legalized and everything. And it's just so sad to me because I was like, boy, I knew you were gay when I met you in, like, 7th grade, and it took us to be 18 and for you to be at George Washington University or wherever to finally come out of the closet. But
as people are more honest about who they are, and that's the whole thing about freedom, right? That's been the hat trick of it's promoting freedom, and then one of the most fascinating things that people say, oh, freedom doesn't mean you get to do anything you want. That's exactly what freedom means. That's precisely, right now, there's a kind of, there's a fiction. On the one hand, people are proclaiming freedom for this and freedom for that. And people pull out terrorism. That's the reason why we should change who we are and change everything that we're doing to be safe. And to like move it away from terrorism on a level. Like there's this whole thing of a parent that's hovering over the child, over their precious, precious child, and you like almost like your kid can't do anything that where they could injure themselves, heaven forbid, right? Well, I used to get on my bike, and I used to ride around Brooklyn. If my parents knew what the near misses and things that I had, I'm sure they would have completely banned me from having a bicycle. But it was like, hey, Vernon, be home by a certain time, and I would be free to explore the city. I would go all over the place. I was taking public transportation. I was on my own taking the bus. I was 10. And that seems, I don't know, but I did it. I survived it.
Right.
And
because, like, to me, I think the first time I rode, like, a public transport, like, a bus by myself was when I came up to FSU, like, to get from, like, the grocery store back to campus, and I'm 18, and that was the first time I, like, swiped my bus card and went somewhere without my mom or my dad.
Yeah, because we scare ourselves. One of the things that's happened in the media is that, like urban legends and things like that, and certainly TV shows, we take the rarefied scenario and we blow it up to be, this is something to be afraid of everywhere, all the time. And it takes the fear and irrationalizes it and makes it like, whenever you see a news report, the news report becomes the justification of that's why the country's going down. It's like, dude, you're taking this totally out of context. And you're blowing it up. The other day, today, I was at my gym. and they showed this really horrible thing in New Orleans. There's a guy he was attempting to, the suspect was black, and he was dragging a woman, like to possibly kidnap her. And I think he was a medical student, intervened, and he got shot. He shot, and they caught it all on videotape. Mm-hmm. He shot the guy in the stomach, and he was going to shoot him again, and his gun jammed. But they got this guy on videotape, and of course I'm horrified by this, and I'm horrified that this happened to this young man. On the one hand, I'm like, I applaud him for intervening, and I believe he wasn't killed. He's in serious condition, but I do believe the woman ran away, was able to get away. So I see this, and I'm like, man, of course, I'm upset this happened to this young man, and of course, when I see that the perpetrator is African American, I'm horrified. I'm like, oh, shit, here we go. And I was just looking around in the news, and they just, Sunday, they had a situation where a family of 6 was murdered at a campsite. And the suspect is white. And it was funny. I was like, going, how come I didn't see that on the news? I didn't see that, and maybe it hasn't hit, because of course, when you see something like on a Twitter feed or whatever, Twitter is much faster, So, and the story is so horrible that I'm sure that it will wind up. I mean, I would think that it would show up in the general news, but we'll see. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
I know we kind of started this whole discussion. We were talking about freedoms and riding the bus when you were 12 versus me 18, still scared to ride the bus sometimes. I still can't figure out the schedules and the maps. It's too much. But do you think that kind of tying this back to music, that if the explicit content label had been passed as a piece of legislation, because it actually wasn't, label companies just ended up adopting it anyway, just to kind of
it was kind of like a threat of, do this. They kind of did it on their own before there was legislation.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that if there was hard legislation that was passed that was you need to have this label if you have this, that kind of almost would have been an infringement on the First Amendment right of artists to
of course it's a kind of infringement on, the whole thing is the or else, right? Mm-hmm. It's the or else, and that's why people like Frank Zappa, stood up, and Dee Snider stood up for, because freedom of speech allows for even difficult speech or hate speech to be something that can't be abridged. I think we're in a difficult time because now with Spotify and with the streaming services, I mean, it's almost moot. I mean, I don't think that people are even focused on it now. It's gone so much further. Mm-hmm. That it would be difficult. But then again, this also overlaps with the whole surveillance obsession, which overlaps to terrorism and what have you. But what's so fascinating to me is the first thing that people pull out is the worst case scenario, child exploitation and child pornography. But here's the thing: human trafficking is an ongoing thing. It's like the war on drugs and the war on whatever. These things are part of the underground economy. And how could I put it? There's a writer, Roberto Saviano. And Roberto Saviano, he was in witness protection for writing about the mafia. He's an Italian writer. And he wrote a book called 000, where he discusses the cocaine trade. You know, how the Colombian cartels became the Mexican cartels and how the mafia was involved. And he has this whole section about who uses cocaine. And it's phenomenal. It's this thing that as a recreational drug, like people at every level of society is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you have cops and judges doing it. You have politicians doing it. You have business people doing it. And at the same time, there's just a denial of this happening on one level. But, one of the reasons why child pornography and exploitation is so difficult to stamp out is because cops are involved. And judges are involved. The preachers are involved. Whenever they find people with this material on their computers, it's always shocking that they grab someone that's an authority figure. Right? And it's almost like hide in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that makes the discussion of all this stuff so fraught and so difficult is that the abuse of power, the abuse of authority is an ongoing issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ongoing problem. So I don't know. I feel like the warning labels. The explicit content labels. That's something that it exists. Does it really abridge free? People are saying all kinds of stuff on records. They're saying all kinds of stuff in movies. All kinds of stuff is happening. In other mediums, there are mediums that exist now that people don't even know what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And technology has really shifted the game big time. Technology and the culture and the microcultures that have sprung up with technology. Like I feel like every 5 minutes you're going to hear about a trend that's already ending. You knew nothing about it. It's already over. Oh, you just get to that? Oh, man, that's so 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true, especially like with social platforms like Twitter and Tumblr and like hashtags and trends. But let me see. I have some more questions here.
Sure.
See if I can pull one up really quick. Okay. So another question that I wanted to ask you, and this is again like related to the PMRC and music censorship. Do you think that like musicians within the industry were kind of split when this happened? Like were half of them more like, I understand what they're doing, and the other half like Dee Snider and the people who were like, no, this is not okay? Or do you think like it went more one way than the other?
Well, I think musicians, some musicians are willing to take on any fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they're the first ones that are going to jump up and say, you can't tell us what to say or what to do. And then other musicians are like, and this is actually sadly the majority of musicians are like, hey man, I just want to make a living. I just want to, and I just want to keep my head down and keep it moving. And the kind of keep your head down, keep it moving thing is probably the majority. And I believe there was, and also there are certain musicians that are, there are conservatives among musicians as well, as there are people who are radical in one way or another. So, yeah, so it was definitely a split. And then a lot of folks are like, hey man, it doesn't bother me, put a label on, I'm still going to say what I want to say.
Right.
Yeah.
I never really thought of that. I know, like, it's so easy for us to think, like, musicians, and we think of, like, Miley Cyrus and, like, all those people, or at least that's what my generation thinks of, versus like I just talked to my dad before we started Skyping because he's such a big Living Color fan. Like I must have heard your albums like every time he would pick me up from anywhere, it would be playing.
Right.
Yeah, to him, like you guys and like King Zax and everybody, those are musicians. And he was like, King Zax they were pretty conservative people, whereas like you guys have like Jay-Z and Miley Cyrus, and those are who you guys think of when you think of musicians, and they're so like on the opposite side. There's no in between. Like they're all like social revolutionaries.
Well, Miley Cyrus is a fascinating case because basically what happened is Miley Cyrus is like Demi Lovato. Like there was a kind of tween. She had a TV show. I mean, my daughter was a fan. We used to see Miley Cyrus. I remember there was an episode of her show where she decided to go blonde, and her fans were really upset, and people would say, "Well, that's not who you are," and then one day she just went completely nuts. She said, "No," she had to break out, and I completely get why she was like, I can't be in the shadow of my pops. I don't want to be this Disney person. I've got to break out. And the fact that she kind of took charge of her identity and sort of kind of created this semi-avant-garde identity, it's pretty interesting because, on a certain level, she decided to Lady Gaga it.
Yeah, she did.
And, to me, the jury is still out with where she goes next with it, on an artistic tip. But it was very much about challenging a persona. And because that persona was promoted, was supported by, kids and their parents. There was a familiarity. Everyone was comfortable.
She was very Disney style.
And she just like, I can't do this. She's got this point in her life. I can't. I'm not going to do this. And so she kind of went, completely to this other place. And at the same time, she raised people's hackles, and people got very upset because, they kind of were depending on her to be a kind of role model, and she just rejected that role. She rejected the role.
Right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me tonight. I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Well, thank you. This is fun. I hope I answer. I know I go off the rails occasionally, but
no, I'm able to use everything that you say. So, yeah, I'm making this project. It's it has a lot